So by the time Ankita is trying to fetch her presentation up, I'll just give you a little bit about her. So currently, she's a tech lead at Loblaw Digital, where she's modernizing the e-commerce experience for shopper Drug Smart. I, and previously, she was a solution architect at Raggle.io and a lead developer at IBM Garage, where she architected and scaled many web and mobile applications for clients using React. Mostly React, GraphQL, and React Native, which is amazing. She loves public speaking and has spoken to several conferences worldwide, which has also allowed her to pursue her passion for traveling. I guess during this time of pandemic, I guess you're enjoying this virtual conferences that's going on. So we're already like a little late on our schedule. So Ankita, the stage is all yours. You can uh, share your screen and we can start off with your presentation.
Sweet, awesome. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Um, okay. All right. I hope everyone is doing okay. Today, my topic is building a lightning fast website with Next.js, GraphQL, and Tailwind. My name is Ankita Kulkarni, and I'm a tech lead at Loblaw Digital. So a little bit more about myself. So as you know, was already introduced, I'm working on the Shoppers Drug Mart website here in Canada, and like basically rebuilding and modernizing the e-commerce experience. So a lot of the tools that I have been talking, will be talking about in this specific talk, which is dedicated towards that. Um, I Previous to Loblaw Digital itself, I worked at Triangle.io as a solution architect. But again, like worked with a lot of different e-commerce applications and helped scale them as well. Yeah, without further ado, let's get going. So before I begin, and in terms of like discussing what makes a lightning fast website or what makes a fast website, right? It's extremely important that along with evaluating the performance overall, it's also important that we also pick the right tools for the job as well, along with monitoring your performance. So hence these tools that I have been talking about, which is that Next.js, GraphQL, and Tailwind overall. And the reason for these three tools is because it's Next does provide us with different rendering techniques, which we will take a look at. GraphQL will help us interact with our APIs or like build new APIs. And Tailwind allows you to add like specific styling that will also improve your performance in terms of your bundle size and whatnot as well. So let's first take a look at what Next.js is. So what is Next.js? Well, Next.js is a React framework for production, is what how I would like to call it. Next.js allows you to add different rendering techniques, but not just that. It is essentially replacing Create React App and the way you build React applications in general, right? So these are the different features that I got from the Next.js website itself. And a lot of these features are really cool because it allows you to get going as a developer, and it allows you to build that fast website you're looking for as well. So it has a zero config setup, it has built-in types, it has a TypeScript support as well. It allows you to do webpack reloading pretty quickly, which is a functionality called fast refresh, built-in css support, and so on. there are a lot of cool features about Next.js, which you would essentially, if you have to go with a React application itself with Create React app, it would take you a lot longer to get started and get going. Next.js allows you and gives you those tools out of the box, so you don't have to necessarily worry about it. And we'll take a look at what those, why Next.js and whatnot. So having said that, what is Next.js, and like why Next.js, and what are the different rendering techniques right here? So Next.js is, honestly, it got really popular because of the different rendering techniques, right? So as we can see over here itself, Next.js provides us with three rendering techniques right now: static region side regeneration, incremental side regeneration, and server side rendering. So what is static site generation? Essentially, what happens is, as a browser requests a specific page itself, a web page, what Next.js is going to do is that, if you, by default, it's going to try to download that data and, like, pre-render it for you, right? So it's, imagine, like, if you were to opt in for, let's say, a static site generation, or you were trying to implement this specific method that allows you to do that. What it's going to do is, it's going to download that data in advance, and it's going to cache it for you. So anytime, so imagine, like, when you deploy your server, as deploy it to the server as part of the build process, it's going to essentially run that script, download it, and cache it for you. So anytime a user accesses a page, it is going to be cached. So it's going to be returned. It's going to return a cache version of it, which is pretty awesome, because now it is already really fast. So in this example, if we were to download these pages, like three different, from we were to build these pages, that is for three different countries like Canada, US, and India, for example, what it's going to do is that all these three pages are automatically cached, because that's what we opt in for in terms of the static site generation. And let's say, in the case of Mexico page, let's say it's the fourth page which is not cached at all, we can choose to return a 404 page, or we can basically ask the server to give it to us. So now, the fourth page, Mexico page, CDN is going to be like, okay, I don't have this cache, so it's going to ask for it. Now, this is incredibly fast, and this is really important, because a lot of our sites are static, right? Like, a lot of we do deal with a lot of static data. The other piece that I would like to talk about is incremental site regeneration, and what this means. And honestly, this is my favorite feature about Next.js, which is that Next.js they do realize that, hey, okay, we do understand that not all pages are static. Some pages might have dynamic content as well. So how do we make sure that you also get the dynamic data, along with still getting the benefit of static data as well? So Next.js has this functionality called incremental site regeneration, which works very similar to static site regeneration itself, but with the revalidate property. What it's going to do is that it's still going to return the three countries that we looked at already, Canada, US, and India, from the CDN cache. But the fourth time, when we ask for Mexico page and it can't find that data in the CDN, it's going to go and ask the server and download that data. So the very first user that tries to access it won't necessarily won't be able to take advantage of the benefit. But Next.js would download the data, cache it. So the second user that comes back that comes to the site would be able to get that cache data, which is pretty awesome. So you get the benefits of both dynamic data as well as static data as well. And lastly, server-side rendering. I mean, server-side rendering is the process of rendering web pages on a server and then passing them to the browser client side, instead of rendering them in the browser directly, right? So it's server-side rendering renders a fully rendered page to the client, and then the client's JavaScript would take over and enable the single page application framework for you. So in this case, all these four pages would essentially be server-side rendered itself. And again, this is really important. This really helps with SEO as well, which we'll take a look. So we saw a lot of these different rendering techniques, but like why what is the advantage of them? And the biggest advantage here is that you can pick and choose as a developer. that you have the tool set necessary where you can say, okay, for this specific page I'm gonna go for static site generation because it's static data, but in some other page you are like, okay, you know what, I actually really want server side rendering. So based on what you're looking for, you will have the tools necessary out of the box to build a really fast website. But what is the challenge with this? So let's say it you are caching hundreds of products. Now imagine imagine even Twitter, for example. We have so many different tweets, right? And in Twitter, we can't wait for Twitter to essentially deploy all those specific tweets, because it's going to get the build time is going to be really really slow. Or in an e-commerce application, let's say a products, right, it's going to be very very slow, and we don't want that. We don't want our build time to be incredibly slow because it's going to again slow us down. So with incremental site regeneration that I talked about, we are able to only say, okay, you know what, these are the top maybe 20 products that are extremely important, and we are able to scale it that way so that we can again pick and choose. So, which is extremely important for us. So, in terms of the features for Next.js, it has the pre-rendering support, so users are taking advantage of this, right? Because they are so if you are on a slower network, you would be able to take even more advantage of that if you go to a subway and so on as well. Server-side rendering is out of the box as well. So again, in Create React app or in the React framework, without Next.js, like you do need to have that is additional setup, and it is a bit tricky as well. So with Next.js, it just provides you out of the box automatic code splitting. Now, this is again extremely important because Next.js is only going to, I guess, download the page or whatever you might want Next.js to download. It's automatically like code splits them. So the minute you click on it, that's when it's going to download that specific content versus all the throughout the site. And it's going to also improve your performance because of all these different reasons as well, because you are finally downloading a smaller bundle size onto the browser. So it does provide you with that additional support. And lastly, better SEO. Now, what about features of Next.js for developers? Well, it does improve our developer experience overall. It gives you the tools, and it gives you everything necessary to help with it as well. Developers can pick the rendering functionality, right? So based on what your use case is, you can, for example, an e-commerce application, you can essentially pick and choose, okay, what would be the different rendering techniques that you would like. Next.js is also a full stack framework. It's also popularly known for that. It's because you can also write serverless functions as part of Next.js itself. So, for example, as a front end developer, you can also write maybe more back end code as well. You can also build APIs as well in there as in the same framework, and it allows you to do that. um, CSS modules are already set up as well, so it also has styling support as well, and a built-in way of adding styling, which is CSS modules too. And CSS modules are essentially modularizing a way to only scope that specific class name to that file itself. But again, like this is all is it's all out of the box, and it's all set up for you, so you can pick and choose. So next, let's take a look at, now that we looked at the advantages of Next.js and how it would allow us to build a lightning fast site, let's take a look at GraphQL. Now, what is GraphQL? Before we begin, before we proceed for why GraphQL? Well, with GraphQL, and I definitely took this gift from the documentation side itself. GraphQL allows you to only get you can only get what you ask for. So in this case, it's only asking for hero, name, and whoops. um, Okay, it only asks for hero, name, and height, and it's only gonna get that. If you ask for more data, then you're gonna get more data. But if you don't want more data, it's not gonna give you more data. So this really helps you because, again, you're downloading less data onto the user's device. So if the user is on a store network, it can really take advantage of that. And with GraphQL, the key thing over here is that it aggregates like data in one place. You are able to understand how the different pieces of functionality works, and you are able to aggregate that. You only get what you ask for. So like we saw in the previous example, in the previous slide itself, which is that you only get hero name. If you ask for hero and name, you're not going to get everything. With more of a REST API standard, it's going to be really difficult to essentially do the same thing, because you're always going to get that huge blob of data which you don't necessarily need, and the user is just getting all that data for no reason, because they didn't ask for it. It allows you to move to a more of a single page architecture from a monolithic architecture. And if your application is not a spa application, which is not a single page application itself, GraphQL helps you to get one step closer, because you can still access, you can start converting your APIs itself more towards a microservices architecture, wherein you can only start taking one API and convert that into maybe like a GraphQL query or something, and then the front end is going to ask for the same thing. And this definitely helps again, because you are evaluating overall the architecture of your application. And there is no API versioning, so every time you do deploy new APIs, you change data or whatever, GraphQL doesn't allow you to do API versioning, which is also a benefit, according to me, just because you don't want to release a V1, a V2, a V3, or V4. You're just deprecating existing fields and you're exposing new fields itself. So that definitely helps a lot with GraphQL. The other thing is also performance. GraphQL does allow you to persist queries as well. So you can like persist queries. You can also like cache data using in-memory cache itself. So like if there's some specific data, that you can easily cache, you can use something like in-mem cache, for example. Now Next.js, also along with Next.js and GraphQL, again, you are downloading even a smaller bundle onto the user's web page, under the user's browser, which really helps overall. And if you're not asking for data that you don't need it, you are not going to get it, which is pretty awesome as well, which also helps with overall performance improvement. um, Using Apollo client on the front end, like I'm a big fan of Apollo client itself. And the reason why Apollo client is really good on the front end itself is because you can then essentially you can make those GraphQL queries and mutations onto the front end itself, because it does do the heavy lifting for you, as it will manage all that cache data. It is going to be very smart about it. It's not going to refetch data when you don't need it. It's going to manage your overall front end state management of your application itself, which really helps a lot. And with Apollo client hooks itself, it's really easy. It's as easy as this code right here, which is like you're fetching loading error data from the, let's say, the get card query itself, with passing in specific variables. And because of that, again, the overall management of the state management solution on the front end becomes a lot easy, so you can also scale your application pretty easily as well. um believe Yep. And the next thing is Tailwind. um Next thing is Tailwind. So what are some of the challenges with styling libraries overall? Well, we've now taken a look from a framework perspective, which is that Next.js, right? We've also taken a look at like API perspective and query perspective and mutation perspective, which is GraphQL. Now let's take a look at styling. Now I really think that styling is one area, or like CSS is one area, which often we underestimate, and that ends up creating a huge bundle size onto the user's browser, because we don't handle CSS well. CSS kind of becomes an afterthought, which is like not good. And if you think about it, like your user experience and your UI architecture is what is determined by overall styling libraries that you go for as well. So because styling historically, like the builds are complex to set up for production, so it kind of becomes an afterthought. Thinking of new class names each time is also a really huge challenge with with specific styling libraries as well, because you always have to go for a new class name. Lack of a defined design system also becomes really tricky as well, because if you don't have a defined design system, your site is going to start lacking that user experience that it needs, and you're also going to download more CSS code when you don't need overall as well. So they're introducing Tailwind, right? So what is Tailwind? Now think of Tailwind like a giant box of Lego. Well, you dump it all out on the floor and you build what you want to build with it. So you choose the piece that you need, you put it in the box. You don't want something, you put it out there, right? And Tailwind gives you those building blocks that allows the developers to build designs in no time at all, right? Because you can pick and choose what you're asking for, and that really helps with specifically with Tailwind, because again, similar to GraphQL, right? You're only asking for data that you need. Similarly in Tailwind, you're only, I guess, combining styles into your build for what you need itself. So why Tailwind, and what is the main concept behind Tailwind? Well, Tailwind follows a concept called utility first CSS, and what that means is that it's all about what kind of CSS classes you want to create and what they do, right? So now instead of naming class names and semantically and whatnot, they go with the completely non-semantic way, because obviously naming things is hard. And what they do essentially do is that you can then they provide you with a set of predefined design system, which we'll take a look at an example itself, and they become an API for a design system. So whenever you want something, you basically ask for it and you go for it. So for example, in this case, this is that design system. So for example, in sizing, this it will provide you essentially W64 to W12 and more. And on the right hand side, instead of like coming up with a new class name each time for this specific div, what it's going to do is that we just have to assign class, and you can pick accordingly the different styles that you want. So in the case W64, it's going to convert that into 64 pixel width or 64 rem width or whatever that defines system is. But essentially that's what helps. It's again for background gradient to BR, again that has a specific styling as well. So things like that it will definitely help you with. um, and it already provides you out of the things out of the box itself, and it helps you work with the constraint of the system, instead of like littering your style sheets with like arbitrary values, right? It doesn't make sense. They make it easy to also be consistent with color choices as well. So similar to width and height and gradients and whatnot, they also give you a predefined colors, typography, shadows, and everything else. So which is a well engineered design system. So you don't need to think about it. You just have to pick what they have, go for it. Or at the same time, you can also customize it. So if you do want specific spacing, colors, typography, you can easily do that with Tailwind, because does provide you with a it does provide you with a generous default theme that will work very well for bootstrap projects, but you can also customize it to the way you want. So in this example would be that in this case for background, these are the different background grays, for example, and this is how you essentially add those utility classes that you need, so that it really helps. So again, like how does Tailwind help you to build like a performant site? Well, like I mentioned, it does improve your performance tremendously. When you're building for production, you should always use the Tailwind's purge option to tree shake unused styles. And you can optimize your final build size. So now if you see on the left hand side, this is just 8.7 KB, because it's only including those specific styles without and not adding the unused styles at all to your build system. So it when you're removing those unused styles with tailwinds, it's very hard to end up with more than, I guess, 10 maybe 10 kilobytes of compressed CSS. And this overall helps the performance tremendously. So we talked about Next.js, which helps with the framework perspective. We talked about GraphQL, which helps with the data perspective, and also now performance from a styling perspective, which is also Tailwind. So why Tailwind? Well, again, semantic class names are harder to maintain. It does give you better composition. So it does help you overall because developers by default think in components, and it makes it easy to use smaller and components and avoid reusability. Reusability is also really obvious as styles repeat as well. And bundles are smaller because of that as well, because you are reusing stuff, you are purging your styles, you are overall improving your performance because of those reasons. And all these small practices lead to a better site. All like performance is not like one golden formula that you just apply, or like a magic wand you apply and it just fixes everything, right? These practices do add up over time, and you do need that better tooling to accordingly go with it, and essentially working with the tool as well to understand what it can do, and it does lead to a performance side, which really is helpful. So what does the future look like? Well, the future is that in a more modernized world, in a world where all these different tools exist, what we have is we can scale with ease. So we can scale all these projects easily, and also some of the other presentations that you saw as well, wherein folks were showing like how it's so easy to use even like Next.js to scale your application, or you don't have to think about a lot of things that you would have to think. For example, a design system. Now every project in my career that I have been on, whenever it lacked like a design system, it was really harder to maintain. At the same time, to come up with a new design system as well was also really hard. So a library like Tailwind definitely helps a lot. You have more control and it's easier to maintain, right? It has easier maintenance. So overall, like that's another thing that you really need to consider when you're building like a website that is really fast, is that it needs to scale well, but it also should be easier to maintain. Because on one hand, you might make the users happy, but you might not make your teams happy because of that. And overall, a better developer experience, because developers are going to, when there's a better developer experience, developers are going to be happy, your team is going to be happier, which is going to help with overall site maintenance, reusability, better code, composability, lack of redundant data, and so on. And with having said all of that, this is pretty much the end. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, you can catch me after. And yeah, thank you so much for listening.
So it was a great introduction, or I would say in-depth knowledge for GraphQL and Tailwind specifically. How you can, up with using Apollo client, you can just improvise on the speed of your whole application. So how long have you been working with this? Like, just a quick question.
No, it has been, I would say like Tailwind about a year now, but then overall
Uh-huh.
GraphQL, it's been a few years, Next.js a couple of years as well. These are all like latest modern tools that really help you to set up
Right.
your overall developer experience. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So amazing. So it's time for our announcement, I guess. I hope we're enjoying this conference a lot.